They said that Filipinos had no writing, no laws, no civilization before the colonizers. That we were just primitive tribes, backward savages, waiting for discovery, waiting for salvation. But what if I told you that a 1,000-year-old piece of junk says otherwise? It is not written in baybayin, not even on paper. It is carved into copper in a lost ancient language from the year 900. It is a receipt, but not the kind that you lose in your wallet. It is a legal declaration, a debt pardon, backed by gold, proof that we had systems, legal, economic, political, and scientific systems long before the conquistadors set foot on our shores. So if this copper plate existed, then why did they call us uncivilized? I mean, if one tiny copper plate can shatter centuries of colonial lies, centuries of colonial miseducation, just imagine what else is buried out there. Mabuhay! Earn Kapampangan, luwid kayo, and in Javanese, or Basa Jawa, Sugang Rawu. Welcome to my channel, it's me Kirby Araullo, your friendly Pinoy historian. And today we're talking about a piece of copper that changes everything we thought we knew about the Philippines. But before we dive in, let's lay some foundations. Let's break down what exactly this thing is. The Laguna Copperplate Inscription, or LCI, is so far the oldest known calendar-dated written document ever found in what is now the Philippines. It is a very thin sheet of copper, measuring about 7 by 12 inches, roughly the size of today's printer paper. And it was almost lost to history until it was found by a worker dredging the Lumbang River in Laguna around 1987. It is dated to April 21, 900 CE, using the Saka calendar, a lunisolar system from India. And it's not a poem or a prayer. It is a legal document, a legal record, a formal debt pardon issued by a ruler named Jayadewa of ancient Tundun, or what is now Tondo, Manila. And the text itself is not even written in baybayin or kulitan, but in the ancient Kawi script of Java, in what is now Indonesia. And it mixes old languages like Old Malay, Sanskrit, and even hints of Old Javanese, Old Kapampangan, and Old Tagalog blended in. Now this is not just a random relic. It's a receipt, a contract, a debt relief, and, if you think about it, a political mic drop carved into copper over 1,000 years ago. In fact, it is exactly 1,125 years old this April 2025. So if a document like this existed, then why do they still teach us that our history began with the discovery in 1521? Our ancestors have long been described as barbaric tribes living in scattered tiny villages, isolated from civilization. But this tiny piece of copper tells us a different story. The Laguna Copperplate name drops so many places like Tundun, Paila, Puliran, and Binuangan, all located in Luzon. That doesn't sound like isolation. That sounds like a well-connected regional network. Even the word Luzon, unknown to many, it comes from the indigenous word lusong in Kapampangan, or lusong in Tagalog, meaning to plunge or to ride the current, hinting at a people, our ancestors, who lived by the tides, not isolated but always in motion. But the inscription does not stop in Luzon. It also mentions Dewata, or what is now Butuan in Mindanao, and Medang on the island of Java in what is now Indonesia. So we're not just talking about, little villages or local barangays. We're looking at a map that stretches from central Luzon to the north to modern-day Indonesia in the south. And get this, it is written in the ancient Kawi script of Java, using Old Malay, the go-to diplomatic language across Southeast Asia back in the day. That means that our ancestors were part of something bigger, the same cultural sphere and maritime network as ancient Srivijaya and Medang. We've also got Persian coins in Sulu, Chinese ceramics in Palawan, huge balangay boats in Butuan, and even 1,000-year-old glass beads in Cebu, and so many more evidences and traces of our past. We were not isolated. We were in the thick of the maritime Silk Road, the ancient Austronesian trade network, trading gold, beeswax, hardwoods, jade, silk, spices, rice, firearms, and even pearls, with places like China, Sumatra, Japan, and beyond. For centuries, we have been told that our ancestors were uneducated, that they were incapable of writing, incapable of reading, incapable of laws, that we were just blank slates, waiting to be civilized. But the Laguna Copperplate inscription cracks that lie, that colonial myth, wide open. By the year 900 CE, our ancestors were already drafting legal documents, invoking authorities, recording debts, and referencing regional powers. And that is not just survival. That is legal literacy, political awareness, and geographic fluency. And if you think about it, around the same time and before our so-called discovery, Europe's population couldn't even read, let alone write their own names. Literacy was locked in monasteries. Meanwhile, in our islands, everyday people were passing down scripts, signing documents, and navigating complex inter-island diplomacy. The LCI was written in the ancient Kawi script, a writing system from Java that traces back to India's Pallava writing system. And again, it uses Old Malay with legal and religious terms in Sanskrit, along with hints of Old Javanese, the working language of diplomacy across maritime Southeast Asia. It also has traces of Old Kapampangan and Old Tagalog, grounding the text in the very languages of the people of Luzon. And in fact, that tradition did not die. Our own indigenous scripts like Baybayin, Kulitan, Hanunuo, Buhid, Tagbanwa, Kurdita, Badlit, and others continued evolving, shaped by our own native tongues. And like Kawi, these scripts trace their roots all the way back to the ancient Brahmic scripts of South India. Even Antonio de Morga noted that our ancestors wrote elegantly back in the 1500s. Now I'm thankful that I myself learned Baybayin before I was 7, and later on I also mastered Kulitan, the Kapampangan script, thanks to my elders in my family, culture bearers who never let these scripts fade into oblivion. Sadly, many were led to believe that we had no legal systems before colonialism, no rule of law, just savages with barbaric customs. But this myth needs more than just one receipt to be debunked, because colonialism didn't just erase our laws. It erased and replaced our societies, our systems that made those laws remarkable. The Laguna Copperplate shows us exactly that. It is a death pardon issued by Jayadewa, the ruler of Tundun. The LCI is a formal legal act, a document recognized and respected not just in Tondo but across Southeast Asia. Jayadewa cancelled a staggering debt worth over 865 grams of gold, owed by a man named Namoran and inherited by his descendants, Lady Angkatan and Buka. Now if you're wondering, that's nearly $2,000 today. But just imagine how huge that amount was 1,000 years ago. And this was not just some random back alley handshake. It was written on copper for posterity, the gold standard for official records across India and Southeast Asia. And the inscription names multiple towns, showing that this was not just a small village matter. It was a legal system spanning regions, spanning modern-day nation-states. And when it mentioned heirs inheriting debt from their ancestors, that is not just custom. That is legal structure, advanced legal structure, personhood and rights. Lady Angkatan and Buka were not just names in a document. They were legal heirs, protected by the right to have their debt forgiven and not passed down into slavery. In modern day, we call that legal personhood or inheritance law, and proof that women also held power and equal rights in our pre-colonial societies. Even the Spaniards cannot deny this. Spanish chroniclers later confirmed that our pre-colonial ancestors had laws, judges, titles, even trial procedures. And these were not just random laws. They were timed, calculated, and even astronomically aligned. And look at Jayadeva's title, Pamagat Senapati. His title reflects more than just local authority. In Southeast Asia, rulers like those in Srivijaya, Medang, Angkor, Majapahit, and even in Luzon or Lusong, they used to follow the Devaraja tradition, where kings or queens were seen as divine intermediaries, anchoring political rule in cosmic order. But here's the thing, laws do not appear out of nowhere. To have a legal system, you need structure. You need society. The Copperplate doesn't just tell us that we had laws, it shows us that we had order. People had responsibilities. Society was layered but fluid, and power was dynamic. It was a system, a society that actually protected the rights of our people. And everyone, not just the rich or the powerful. And our laws were not just about rules, they reflected our indigenous values. For example, in Kapampangan, we have the word luwalu, the virtue and duty to rise up for the vulnerable, to protect the oppressed, to do what is right, to defend the defenseless, and emancipate the exploited. And that sense of justice was not just legal, it was moral. In Kapampangan, those who freed the enslaved were called mangabus, and the act of freeing slaves was called ikabus. Now this was not just words in a language, it was liberation written in our DNA. But here's the thing, most people don't even realize, our pre-colonial societies were not frozen in place. In Lusung, a ruler like a datu could be removed if they lost the people's trust, if they were oppressive, corrupted, or simply negligent of taking care of the community. And on the other hand, the slaves or alipin could actually be freed and even rise in the ranks. And the timawa or the free citizens in the middle could also shift their allegiance to a ruler or even rising to lead themselves. And again, even those in bondage, the alipin had the chance to rise, had the chance to be a datu. Unlike the dehumanizing slavery in the West, our ancestors' system still saw the alipin as people, as humans, not as properties. And we can see this in the LCI, where even staggering debt tied to bondage and slavery could be lifted and forgiven. And the nobility, they were not just entitled by blood, they had to earn it too. For example, known in Kapampangan as the Mapyang Sugi, or literally refined like gold, the royalties were still expected to earn and embody that title, that status through service, diplomacy, and responsibilities. Indeed, it was possible for abusive datus to fall from grace and end up in slavery. Centuries before the European Age of Enlightenment, our ancestors already understood what we now call the social contract in moral and political philosophy. There was accountability back then. So if you think about it, almost 1,000 years before the American Revolution or the Philippine Revolution, our ancestors already had a system that was in many ways more democratic in spirit and more accountable in practice than our modern-day republic. They called us primitive, superstitious, hopeless, just waiting to be saved. But we had societies that moved like the oceans, fluid, interconnected, and built on deep knowledge and endless wisdom. Our ancestors did not just gaze at the stars, they could literally read them. And they saw more than just beauty, they saw maps, seasons, and stories. The Laguna Copperplate is dated using the Saka calendar, a lunisolar system used across India, Java, Cambodia, the Philippines, and beyond. It reads Saka year 822, month of Waisaka, and the 4th day of the waning moon. That's not superstition. That is timekeeping grounded in celestial movement. And yes, it is science. That's astronomy rooted in observation, precision, and practical real-world application. Anton Posma first deciphered the inscription in 1991, revealing its language, legal function, and cultural significance. Then in 1996, Hector Santos pinpointed the date as Monday, April 21, 900 CE, or 900 AD in the Julian calendar. Now building on that, I myself calculated the equivalent in the Gregorian calendar that we actually use today, which lands on Monday, April 26, 900 CE, a fixed point in time grounded in the skies. And Namoran's debt of 1 kati and 8 suwarna of gold, or roughly 865 grams of gold, reflects a standardized economic system, a standardized measurement that were also used across Southeast Asia, from Srivijaya in Sumatra to Medang in Java to the Kamay courts in Angkor, and here in Tondo in Luzon. And beyond Luzon, across the islands from Butuan to Sulu, our ancestors were master navigators who mapped out currents, wind, monsoon cycles, and star positions to sail across the open seas. The Babaylans or Mamaluyan in Kapampangan, far from being mere mystics or healers, they tracked lunar phases, tidal rhythms, and seasonal changes, among others, to align rituals, agriculture, and community life with celestial patterns. So if we had navigation, astronomy, sciences, timekeeping, law, and so many others, then what exactly were we missing? Maybe the real lie is not that we did not have civilization, but that enlightenment and civilization had to come from the outside. And if the colonizers brought civilization and enlightenment to our islands, to our people, then why exactly do we have such document from the year 900? This copperplate that we have is only the first page. We know for a fact that there was at least one more page. but sadly, it hasn't yet been found. But even this single page is already enough to challenge the timeline we've been taught. The Laguna Copperplate Inscription was written 621 years before Magellan ever set sail, before the so-called discovery of the Philippines. Unknown to many, around this time as the Copperplate, Spain was fractured, divided between smaller Christian kingdoms in the shadows of the more advanced Islamic Al-Andalus. In fact, the vast majority of Europeans around the time of Lady Angkatan and the Moran couldn't even read or write their own names unless they were monks or scholars in the monasteries. Meanwhile, in Luzon and across the islands of Southeast Asia, we were using multilingual legal decrees in Old Malay, Old Javanese, Old Kapampangan, Old Tagalog, Sanskrit, and written in Kavi, dating them by the moon and settling debts in gold. And these are not just scraps gold either. Nearly a kilo of gold was pardoned in this one case alone. Our islands were so abundant in gold that even slaves wore and owned them as bangles, earrings, chains, and lucky charms. I mean, even the dead had golden masks and golden teeth. Contrary to popular belief, the vast majority of our ancestors were literate. They could read and write, a fact that the Spaniards acknowledged. The chroniclers noted that our people had their own writing systems, legal codes, and complex cosmopolitan ways of life. They even praised our ancestors' elegant penmanship. And then came the US occupation after the Philippine-American War. They vilified Spain as cruel and outdated. And yet, they still framed the Spanish conquest as the beginning of civilization in the Philippines. Why? So that America could position itself as the new modern-day savior, bringing democracy and progress to a people they claimed had none, to a people they saw as barely human. But it was the same imperialist lie, the same colonial myth, just in a different accent. Just think about it. This copperplate was written back when our ancestors were masterfully sailing and trading across Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, and beyond. Meanwhile, Europe around the same time was fragmented, isolated, and deep in its own so-called Dark Ages. But somehow, many still believe that Europeans gave us civilization, that the West gave us enlightenment. Somehow, they discovered us, as if nothing came before. But the truth is, we already had our own thriving civilization, navigating and mastering the oceans for thousands of years, long before they came. The Laguna Copperplate Inscription is not just any artifact. It is a challenge to everything we thought we knew about the Philippines. It proves that we were not isolated, that in fact, we were part of a vibrant network stretching from Southeast Asia to the Indian Ocean and beyond. We were not illiterate. We used scripts adapted from India and Java, but we also indigenized them, making them our own. We were not lawless. We had leaders, jurisdictions, and legal documentation. We were not primitive. We tracked the stars, measured that in gold, and followed lunar calendars with precision. We had sciences. We were not saved. We had our own civilization. Long before laws were written on paper, our ancestors inscribed them onto copper. Unknown to many, that same mastery of metalwork lived on to this day, as seen in Pukpuk, the Kapampangan traditional art of intricately hand-carving precious metals passed down through generations over the centuries. The Philippines was never outside history. We were writing it in ancient languages, on copper plates, using scripts of diplomacy, and even weights of gold. This wasn't just scrap metal or lost receipt. It was a legal declaration of sovereignty engraved in a golden language centuries before Europeans even knew we existed. For generations, for centuries, this copperplate lay buried in mud, while classrooms told us that our history began in 1521. But our ancestors left us with this clue, written in ink made of metal, spoken in power, and carved into copper for all to remember. Across the islands, we have inscriptions, epics, textiles, oral traditions, goldwork, boat burials, living languages, and so many more, but each of them carrying the legacies of our complex and literate cultures. But our story does not stop at our islands. From Javanese, Srivijayan, and Champa records to early Chinese and Japanese accounts, our neighbors were already documenting us long before Magellan showed up. The problem is not that we had no history. The real problem is that we've been taught to read and understand history only through the lens of Western empires. The Laguna Copperplate is a beautiful reminder that we've always had history, that we've always had culture and civilization, and now it's time to tell it in our own voices, on our own terms. We don't really need permission to study our own past. What we really need is perspective, our own perspective. We just need to see our own histories through our own eyes, not through a colonial lens. And the truth is, we already had receipts, literal receipts, written in precious metals. I mean, if one tiny copper plate, a tiny scrap of metal that we almost lost, if this tiny copper plate can shatter centuries of colonial lies, centuries of miseducation, then just imagine what else is still out there that remains buried, untranslated, unread, or quietly collecting dust in the archives. Imagine what stories are still missing, what truths are still waiting to be told. And if you want to learn more and dig deeper, I've actually made hundreds of videos on this channel, unpacking our people's histories, cultures, and everything in between. From pre-colonial societies to fierce revolutions and Southeast Asian diplomacy. And I've also written several books all about reclaiming the narratives of our ancestors. So if this video sparks something in you, don't stop here. Keep exploring, keep digging, keep an open mind, and keep asking critical questions. Because the story of our motherland did not start with the colonizers. It began with our people, with us, with our diverse yet interwoven roots. Maraming salamat po or in Kamapangan, dakal pong salamat kay Kongan and in Javanese, maturnuwon. See you next time or in Tagalog kita kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitiks and in Bahasa Melayu, Jum palagi!